From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. People around the world are commemorating International Workers' Day with marches and rallies. The day originated in the U.S. in the 19th century when the labor union movement rose up against unjust working conditions and demanded better pay, reasonable hours, and paid leave. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro addressed the mass demonstration on International Workers' Day. He said that the people of Venezuela mobilized to stop yesterday's failed coup and that the opposition is now isolated.
There is no way, and the people and the National Bolivarian Forces will never allow a coup d'etat from any sign in our homeland. And what happened in Altamira that I just described, there were only the coup plotters, and in turn they flowed away. And up until now they keep flying away. And the military and police forces are looking for them, for these coup plotters that are isolated. Simultaneously in all the countries, the people from the beginning of the day were mobilized in the streets to say no to the coup d'etat and to say yes for the homeland, yes to the revolution.
President Maduro has also said the coup attempt was organized in the U.S. He demanded that international bodies investigate the actions against the Venezuelan people.
This coup d'etat that was pretended yesterday was directed personally from the White House, John Bolton. I denounce this. And I ask that this is investigated, these actions, illegal actions and coup plotter actions of John Bolton against the Venezuelan sovereignty and people from Venezuela.
Maduro's speech came after Venezuelans took to the streets to celebrate May Day and the achievements of the Bolivarian Revolution. This came just one day after the government quelled an attempted coup d'etat. Chavistas and supporters of President Nicolas Maduro came out in numbers to support workers' rights and the struggle against imperialism. Workers were in high spirits.
It's one of the most important days we have. It's our process and we need all the workers, the whole Venezuelan people. With the same commitment, we are Venezuela and we are indestructible. Our commander, Hugo Chavez, gave us an opportunity so that on May 1st, there would be a law for the workers to protect the workers. I was one of the people who benefited, so I thank God for Chavez and our worker, President Nicolas Maduro, who will continue in the revolution for it's indestructible. Love with love is paid, and Venezuela loves you, Nicolas. Keep fighting. You will never be without support.
And in Cuba, thousands gathered since 5 in the morning to take part in the traditional May Day March in Havana and Santiago de Cuba. Children, students, and workers are commemorating the achievements for workers in one of the most important events of the Cuban Revolution. President Miguel Díaz-Canel and Raúl Castro are also attending the celebration.
En cualquier momento lo tenemos.
Celebrations have been ongoing throughout the day. Marchers are waving flags and bearing placards with revolutionary slogans. Meanwhile, in Chile, police heavily repressed protesters who were demonstrating in the streets of Santiago. Police fired tear gas and water cannons against demonstrators who had set barricades on fire. Thousands of workers joined the protest organized by the country's main labor unions. They protested against high unemployment and work discrimination.
We are oppressed, we are exploited, and the only thing that matters is the good of others, not of us as workers who are contributing to the country, but are not listened to.
Our correspondent in Santiago, Paula Dragni, has the details.
We have been following two protests here. One of the two was heavily repressed by riot police even before it started. An event organized for union leaders to speak was suspended due to the police, and close to 100 people were arrested. Several people were also injured by rubber bullets fired by the police on demonstrators. May 1st take place ahead of a change to labor policies, which have been very controversial. It is not known what the reform includes exactly, so workers have been protesting against it and the lack of information. One measure related to women was recently made known, saying that a company is no longer forced to pay for transport of the women who need to breastfeed. Those are some of the rights workers have been losing, and which affect mainly women. Finally, the Chilean workers sent their solidarity to Venezuelan people.
We thank Paola for that report. Thousands also took to the streets in Ecuador to mark International Workers' Day. Demonstrators joined a march in Quito organized by the main labor unions. They protested against a recent government accord with the International Monetary Fund and the precarious working conditions. People also demand a stronger fight against corruption and the right to have a decent job.
Women have precarious labor conditions with smaller salaries, and that is causing the income decrease for families. In Ecuador, more than 50% of women are the main providers, and the low salaries are affecting not only families but the people in general.
We are fighting for workers' rights. We fight for our children. What are they going to do in the future? We are fighting now for the future for our children, for the future of our country.
For his part, the Bolivian president sends a message to workers in the country, congratulating them for their work.
In this historic day for the workers in Bolivia, I congratulate you. I perfectly remember when in previous years, when the neoliberal governments were in power, people lived this day in a hunger strike or in a national strike in the streets. The campesino movement blocked roads. There were no commemorations. Now I thank very much for participating in this march to pay tribute to the workers.
In Mexico, workers called for a total cancellation of the country's educational reform during May Day commemoration. Hundreds of workers marched down Mexico's Reforma Avenue demanding for better working conditions and social security.
We demand the total cancellation of the educational reform. That's why the people from the National Trade Union for Workers in the Education sector gathered this May 1st on Workers' Day.
Workers in Brazil have also taken to the street. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Meir, has more.
I'm standing on the edge of a very noisy Anhangabaú square in downtown São Paulo, where for the first time ever, the two largest labor union confederations in Brazil, the Força Sindical and the CUT, have decided to hold their annual workers' party together in the same location. So there's dozens of musical acts that have been playing since 10 this morning. And there's a crowd of around 50,000 people out on the square. And they took advantage of this moment today to announce the date of the national general strike against far-right President Jair Bolsonaro's neoliberal retirement reforms. They've set the date for June 14th. So on that date, millions of people will refuse to go to work. They'll shut down roads, public transportation will stop running, all in an attempt to defeat these retirement reforms, which if passed, would turn control of management of the pension funds into the private sector, mimicking what dictator Augusto Pinochet did in Chile in 1980, which resulted in a lot of pain and suffering for the Chilean elderly population, including record suicide rates among the elderly. So the unions are united, and the feeling in the air is optimism that just as when Michel Temer took over the presidency after the 2016 parliamentary coup, they will be able to defeat this neoliberal initiative.
We thank Brian for that report. And finally, workers in Argentina have also been protesting since early in the morning. These images you're watching show people cooking in public spaces, preparing food for those marching. Thousands gathered on the streets to reject President Macri's economic policies, which have increased unemployment and poverty. But on the eve of International Workers' Day, hundreds of thousands of workers also took to the streets of Argentina during a national strike which put a stop to the country.
Despite the threats by police, Tuesday's national strike played out on Argentina's streets to protest against President Mauricio Macri's current economic measures, which have led to widespread hunger and unemployment in the most vulnerable sectors of society.
Está paralizado el país.
The country is crippled. People are already tired and desperate. We are hungry and we don't have jobs. Salaries are not enough to pay rent. Prices have increased by 3,000 and even 4,000%. They are destroying the working class, so they stop fighting for their rights.
The national strike and mobilization caused a great impact. Workers' unions rejected the government's attempts at undermining their demands. No flights, metro or banks operated on Tuesday, and even garbage collection was cancelled. Teachers and state workers joined the cause, and a great number of public drivers supported the protest and called their own strike for May the 1st.
This has been a very successful strike, and it's all because of the daily situation we live in. We all have someone that has lost a job, that can't bring any food back home. That is why this is the only way, the unity on the streets.
From the historic Plaza de Mayo, protesters announced that their fight will continue, and not a step will be taken back in the fight against inflation, which doesn't allow most citizens to be able to afford a whole month's expenses.
Argentina is a very wealthy country. Its problem is that all our wealth goes into very few hands. We have to go and find that wealth, to redistribute it fairly. That's why this strike has a deep political meaning, and that's why we demand a major change in the economy.
Just one day ahead of International Workers' Day, over 200,000 people filled the streets of Argentina to be part of an act where workers' unions demanded a change to the economic course of the country.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Colombian Senate is once again voting on the objections put forth by President Iván Duque to the statutory law for the special jurisdiction for peace. Following a long session on Tuesday where the objections were debated, no consensus was reached by lawmakers. On Wednesday, they started a new session hoping to achieve the necessary votes to either approve or reject the president's objections. In March, President Duque presented a number of objections he had to the statutory law. Many criticized this as a stalling tactic to continue undoing the 2016 peace accords signed with the FARC. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is part of the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America, has denounced the attempted coup on Venezuela on Tuesday. The alliance says the attempt undermined the constitutional order of Venezuela. It's calling on the international community to respond to the coup attempt and assess the possible consequences of the situation. The National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa commemorated Workers' Day with a strong swipe at capitalism. The union blamed capitalist systems for causing crisis and a bleak future for emerging economies. It said South Africa has failed to build its own manufacturing industry and increase industrialization because of this capitalist system, which does not promote workers' welfare. The union also expressed displeasure at the move by government to privatize companies, saying this will cause unemployment. South African athlete Caster Semenya has lost a court challenge against IAAF testosterone rules. The South African runner lost her court challenge against IAAF rules forcing female athletes to regulate their testosterone levels. Semenya, double Olympic champion, was fighting measures imposed by the International Association of Athletics Federations that compel hydronetic athletes or those with differences of sexual development to lower their testosterone levels if they wish to compete as women. South Africans have accused the International Association of Athletics Federations of discrimination against athlete Caster Semenya. South Africans were disappointed by the outcome of the Court of Arbitration for Sport on the matter involving Caster Semenya.
They need to leave Caster alone. As South Africans, we love Caster and will continue supporting her all the way as she keeps winning. They need to leave her alone. We have accepted her the way she is, so there is nothing they can do. We love her as South African women.
A group of Guatemalan anthropologists have started a search for some of the victims of the military dictatorship. The search began as the government hopes to reform a law to give amnesty for those responsible in the massacres.
It's the 5th day since the search for the remains of a family who were killed by the military dictatorship in July 1982 started. They died in the Chalbal River in the municipality of Ixcan, where a scorched earth strategy was developed by the army.
We've been told that there are 2 graves. One has the remains of the father, and another one has the mother and sister-in-law of the woman who asked us to find her family. We already located her father's grave.
3 of the victims belonged to the same family, who were buried while the survivors fled from the Guatemalan army during the dictatorship of General José Efraín Ríos Montt.
They were not actually buried. They were only covered with a bit of sand and not deep enough.
The family's only survivor said she has been waiting for this exhumation for more than 37 years.
I haven't found my mother yet. I have my father, and I'm very happy because I found him finally, and I will take him out of there soon. I will take him home.
This family has been looking for their relatives for 40 years. Not being able to find them feels like a sickness we cannot be cured from.
While survivors continue to look for their loved ones, social organizations warn that the Guatemalan state wants to erase the past.
According to official data, there are 45,000 missing, but I will say there are 45 plus 1. That 1 is the memory that the state is trying to erase.
There are reports that a group of lawmakers have proposed a reform to the National Reconciliation Law, hoping to give complete amnesty for those responsible for crimes against humanity.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thousands of Philippine protesters also marched in May Day protests. They denounced President Rodrigo Duterte's economic policies, which have left just under a quarter of the nation of 106 million in poverty. Rows of marchers flew red banners and chanted near the presidential palace in Manila, where they set fire to an effigy adorned with Chinese and US flags, the 2 competing powers in the Philippines.
We continue to call on the government to provide a reasonable and living wage, not only for us teachers, but for all the workers in the country, so we could survive the surging inflation.
Meanwhile, thousands of workers gathered in separate rallies in Jakarta to mark May Day. A large group of Indonesians staged a peaceful protest on the streets and marched towards the presidential palace, demanding wage increases to counter rising inflation in Southeast Asia's largest economy. Thousands also gathered at an indoor stadium in Indonesia's capital to celebrate the day and were addressed by presidential candidate Prabowo Subianto, who said that workers formed the backbone of the economy. Britain's parliament has declared a climate change emergency following a call from opposition Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. However, the measure was passed as an opposition motion, so it has no direct consequences for policy. The vote followed the 11-day protest that shut down parts of central London.
Parliament rarely leads change. It usually drags its feet. It's normally the last place to pick up on the major reforms that society is demanding. Think about the huge transformations in our society. Workers' rights, women's rights, gay rights. The impetus has always come from outside, from social movements and communities, while Westminster is often the last place to understand that. Let us not repeat that pattern. Let's respond to what a young generation is saying to us and raising an alarm. So by becoming the first parliament in the world to declare a climate emergency, we could, and I hope we do, set off a wave of actions from parliaments and governments all around the world.
U.S. Attorney General William Barr has appeared before a Senate panel to face questions about his handling of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report. This comes following reports that Mueller questioned how Barr handled his investigation in a letter to the Attorney General. Barr has been accused of misrepresenting the document, which details how Trump tried to impede the probe. Democrats say Barr is trying to protect Trump.
Now we know, contrary to what you said on April 9th, that on March 27th, Robert Mueller wrote to you expressing very specific concerns, that your March 24th letter, remember you're testifying on April 9th, that your March 24th letter failed to capture the, to quote Mr. Mueller, the context, nature, and substance, close quote, of his report. And what really struck me, Mr. Mueller wrote that your letter threatened to undermine a central purpose for which the department appointed the special counsel, to assure full public confidence in the outcome of the investigation. Why did you testify on April 9th that you didn't know the concerns being expressed by Mueller's team, when in fact you had heard those concerns directly from Mr. Mueller 2 weeks before?
Well, as I said, I talked directly to Bob Mueller about his letter to me and specifically asked him, what exactly are your concerns? Are you saying that the March 24th letter was misleading or inaccurate, or what? He indicated that it was not. He was not saying that, and that what he was concerned about...
That wasn't my question.
Brazil has been paying its respects to one of its greatest ever samba stars. Beth Carvalho died on Tuesday at the age of 71. Celebrities and fans joined her family to sing their farewell at a wake hosted by Botafogo Football Club in Rio de Janeiro. Beth Carvalho was one of the founders of Samba Pagode. During Brazil's military dictatorship, her lyrics often celebrated the resilience of the poor. Last year, she sang for the release of Lula da Silva from prison. We leave you with that, her final recorded song.
Brasil andar pra frente, vamos caminhar. Seja o elo da corrente, vamos caminhar. O povo quer, o povo decide, o povo diz. Nós queremos Lula andando livre do país. Vai pro Brasil andar pra frente, vamos caminhar. Seja o elo da corrente, vamos caminhar. O povo quer, o povo decide, o povo diz. Nós queremos Lula andando livre no país. Ele une o país, semeando amor. Esse povo tão sofrido, trabalhador. A sua meta é ver o povo com igualdade. Alimento, moradia, vaga na universidade. Pro Brasil andar pra frente.